I remember the moment as if it were yesterday. The room was polished, gleaming with marble floors and expensive wood paneling that smelled faintly of polish and money. It wasn't the kind of place I usually belonged in. I was just a new hire, still learning where the coffee machine was, still afraid of asking stupid questions during meetings. That morning, the boardroom was buzzing with nervous energy. Everyone was waiting for the arrival of Mr. Carmichael, the CEO. People whispered about him like he was a myth, a man of impossible wealth and sharper-than-steel instincts. Some called him ruthless, others admired his brilliance, but everyone agreed on one thing: he didn't suffer fools. And here I was, barely 2 months into the company, invited into this meeting because I had been the only one available to assist with a minor presentation. When the heavy double doors opened, the chatter stopped instantly. Mr. Carmichael entered, tall, commanding, eyes unreadable. But what most people didn't know, and what I had discovered by chance in a company memo, was that he was profoundly deaf. He could read lips with uncanny precision, but he preferred written notes or interpreters. Today, there was no interpreter. Only us, an anxious crowd of mid-level employees, all pretending not to notice the elephant in the room. Something stirred inside me. I remembered the afternoons I spent years ago helping my cousin learn sign language after she lost her hearing. I wasn't fluent, but I knew enough to say hello, enough to show respect. So when Mr. Carmichael reached the head of the table and the silence grew almost painful, I raised my hand slightly and signed, "Good morning, sir. Welcome." The room froze. My colleagues' eyes widened. A few snickers escaped, as if I'd broken some sacred, unspoken rule of formality. One man muttered under his breath, "Oh, you've got to be kidding." But then something remarkable happened. Mr. Carmichael stopped mid-step. His expression, usually granite-hard, softened. He blinked once, twice, then slowly broke into a smile. And in that still, breathless room, he began to clap, deliberately, steadily, directed at me. The laughter died in an instant. Chairs creaked. Someone coughed. And I stood there, heart pounding, realizing I had just crossed an invisible threshold, one I didn't even know existed until that very second. Sometimes the smallest gesture can carry the weight of 1,000 unspoken truths. After that meeting, my world at the company shifted in ways I hadn't expected. On the surface, everything seemed the same. I still took the crowded train into the city every morning, still logged into spreadsheets that blurred my eyes after hours of staring. But the air around me. During lunch that day, I sat alone at the corner table of the cafeteria, trying to make sense of it all. My tray carried the same dull sandwich and lukewarm soup as always, but it felt heavier. My ears buzzed with fragments of whispers from nearby tables. "Did you see her? She planned that." "No way. She just got lucky." Their words pricked at me like invisible needles. What none of them knew was that my signing wasn't a calculated move. It wasn't strategy. It was instinct, born from the memory of afternoons with my cousin, sitting on the back porch, her small hands trembling as she tried to master new signs. I remembered her tears, her laughter when she finally got it right, the quiet pride that bloomed on her face when she realized she could still be understood. That bond was etched into me, something pure and unshakable. Later that week, a surprising email appeared in my inbox. It was short, formal, and signed only with his initials. "JC requests your presence in his office, 3 p.m. today." My breath caught. The CEO wanted to see me. Alone. I arrived at his office with my palms sweating, clutching the only gift I could think of, a small scarf my cousin had once made me, patterned with soft blue swirls. It was my talisman, a reminder of why I had signed that morning in the first place. I slipped it into my bag for courage. When I stepped into his office, I didn't find the intimidating giant I'd imagined. Instead, Mr. Carmichael was seated at a large oak desk, sunlight pouring across his shoulders, casting him in unexpected warmth. He gestured for me to sit, and as I lowered myself into the chair, I noticed something in his eyes that unsettled me. Not just curiosity, but an unmistakable spark of recognition. I didn't yet know it, but this meeting was not about a simple thank you. It was a test, one that would reach far deeper into my character than I could possibly have prepared for. Kindness, once offered, has a way of circling back to us, sometimes in ways we never imagine. Mr. Carmichael wasted no time. He leaned forward slightly, his hands folded neatly on the desk, his eyes fixed on me with a kind of focus that strips away pretense. He spoke softly, each word deliberate, his lips easy enough to read. "You know sign language?" It wasn't a question, it was a statement. I nodded. A little. Enough to say hello. My cousin is deaf, so I learned the basics for her. His lips curved into the faintest smile. He paused, then slid a small notepad across the desk toward me. On the top page, in sharp, slanted handwriting, he had written, "I am searching for someone I can trust. Someone who listens differently." The words stunned me. My first instinct was to ask what he meant, but I stopped myself. Something bold, disruptive, the kind of project that could either transform everything or sink under its own ambition. But here was the catch. He didn't want the usual circle of polished executives around him. Too many of them, he said, were blinded by status, eager to say yes without hearing what mattered. He wanted someone unpolished, someone outside the hierarchy, with no stake in power games. And he had chosen me. "But there are rules," he added, his gaze sharpening like a blade. He raised a finger, counting them off. "First, you must speak truth, even when it costs you. Second, you must protect confidentiality. Nothing leaves these walls without my say. Third, you will carry yourself with humility. If pride enters the room, you will leave it. Do you accept?" My throat went dry. Every instinct told me to say yes immediately. But I hesitated, aware that agreeing meant more than career advancement. It meant walking a line that could either strengthen my integrity or destroy it. Finally, I signed one word. Yes. His eyes softened again, and he reached into a drawer. He placed a single object on the desk between us, a small silver key, delicate but ornate, with an inscription so faint I could barely read it. "This will open a door," he said. "But whether you walk through it will depend on you." I didn't yet know what door he meant, only that the key burned with weight in my palm, heavier than its size should allow. Every test begins with a choice, and every choice reveals who we truly are. That silver key weighed on me all afternoon. It sat in my pocket during meetings, pressing against my leg as if reminding me that I was carrying something secret, something others would envy if they knew. I kept touching it unconsciously, afraid I'd lose it, afraid I might one day wish I had never accepted it. The following morning, I found an envelope slipped under my office door. No name on the front, only a plain white seal. Inside was a single slip of paper, typed neatly. "Room 7B, after hours. Bring the key." My pulse quickened. I knew that corridor, the part of the building few people ever ventured to, where old storage rooms and unused offices gathered dust. At 6:15 p.m., when most of my coworkers had long gone home, I made my way there. The fluorescent lights buzzed faintly overhead, and the silence deepened with every step. Room 7B looked like any other locked door, but when I slid the key into the lock, the tumblers turned smoothly, almost eagerly, as though the door had been waiting for me. Inside, to my astonishment, was not a storage closet, but a perfectly kept workspace. A long table with files stacked neatly, a small projector, and a single notepad with my name written across the top. They contained reports of projects the company had abandoned, some with financial losses, some with questionable ethics. A few showed signs of manipulation, numbers that didn't quite add up, contracts that seemed to favor outsiders at the expense of the company itself. Someone had buried them, and now, inexplicably, they were in my hands. It was overwhelming. I spent hours going through the material, scribbling notes, cross-checking figures. At one point, I nearly fell asleep at the table, but the memory of Mr. Carmichael's words, "Speak truth, even when it costs you," kept me awake. And then there was the scarf. I had taken it out of my bag and laid it on the table beside me. Its soft blue swirls reminded me of evenings with my cousin, of patience and persistence, of learning to communicate when words alone weren't enough. The scarf seemed out of place in that sterile, secretive room, yet somehow it anchored me, reminded me who I was. The puzzle deepened when I realized that some of the files contradicted one another. One report suggested a project had failed because of technical flaws, while another implied sabotage. And the signatures, I recognized one of them. It belonged to a senior executive I'd seen laughing in the boardroom the day I signed to Mr. Carmichael. It wasn't just data I was uncovering. It was a pattern, a hidden thread, something that smelled of betrayal. And I couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. Truth has a way of whispering first before it shouts. It was well past midnight when I finally closed the last file. My eyes burned, my hands shook slightly, but my mind was sharper than it had ever been. There was no denying it now. Someone high up in the company was siphoning resources, disguising failures, and pushing blame onto smaller teams. The numbers weren't just mistakes, they were intentional cover-ups. And at the center of it all was a name I didn't want to believe. Richard Hale. The same executive who had laughed the loudest when I greeted Mr. Carmichael in sign language. The one who had mocked me under his breath. I sat back, stunned. My instinct was to run to Mr. Carmichael immediately, to deliver the truth and let him deal with it. But something stopped me. The files I held weren't just proof of dishonesty, they were weapons. If I revealed them carelessly, I could ruin reputations, jeopardize jobs, maybe even collapse entire departments. And if Hale discovered I was the one digging into his secrets, he wouldn't hesitate to make me pay. That was when I noticed a final page tucked into the back of the folder. It wasn't a financial statement or contract. It was a handwritten note in the same sharp script Mr. Carmichael had used before. Truth is not enough. Show me courage. Bring me what others fear to say. I froze. As I folded the files back into the envelope, the scarf slipped from my lap to the floor. I picked it up slowly, running my fingers over the familiar swirls. I remembered my cousin's trembling hands, her frustration when the signs wouldn't come out right, her persistence when others underestimated her. She had taught me that real strength isn't in loud displays, but in refusing to give up when silence feels safer. The realization hit me hard, a cold clarity. This was the reason Mr. Carmichael had chosen me. Not because I was the smartest or the most experienced, but because I had shown him something small, something most would dismiss, a willingness to step into awkward silence with simple respect. Now he wanted to see if I could do it again, but on a scale that could change everything. The true test wasn't hidden in the numbers. It was hidden in me. Sometimes the greatest revelation isn't about others at all. It's about the kind of person we dare to become. The next week unfolded like a storm tightening its grip. The deeper I went into the files, the clearer the picture became. Richard Hale wasn't just cutting corners. He was orchestrating a network of deceit. He funneled contracts toward associates, buried losses in obscure budgets, and charmed his way through presentations that dazzled shareholders but hollowed out the truth. And yet, outwardly, Hale seemed untouchable. He had the smooth confidence of a man who believed himself invincible. His laughter echoed in the hallways. He shook hands like a politician and remembered everyone's name. In meetings, he commanded the floor with polished ease, while I sat there with a silver key in my pocket, wondering how much longer I could carry this secret. Then the complications began. First, an anonymous note appeared on my desk. Be careful whose files you're opening. No signature. Just the unmistakable implication that someone knew. I swallowed my fear and locked the note away, but it rattled me. Second, my direct supervisor, a kind but cautious man named Daniel, pulled me aside. He whispered urgently, "Whatever you're doing, stop. Hale has eyes everywhere. You don't want to end up on the wrong side of him." His words were laced with fear, but also with something else, regret. As if he, too, had seen what I had seen and chosen silence. The worst came at a team dinner later that week. I had just finished a bland plate of chicken when Hale himself appeared beside me, smiling with a kind of warmth that chilled me to the bone. "You're the one who impressed the boss, aren't you?" he said lightly, clapping me on the shoulder. Word travels fast. I forced a polite smile, but my scarf slipped from my lap onto the floor. Hale bent down to pick it up. For a fraction of a second, his eyes lingered on the swirled blue pattern, then flicked back to me. He handed it over with a grin, but something in his look told me he had registered more than he let on. That night, lying awake, the scarf draped across my nightstand, I realized something chilling. Hale suspected me. He didn't know exactly what I was doing, but he sensed it. And if Mr. Carmichael was waiting for me to show courage, then the window was narrowing fast. The files were no longer puzzles to solve. They were live wires, and I was holding them barehanded. Sometimes the hardest part of courage isn't the danger outside. It's the voice inside that whispers, "You're not ready." The day of reckoning came sooner than I expected. Mr. Carmichael summoned me to the executive boardroom, the same polished chamber where it had all begun. This time, however, the long table was filled with every senior leader, including Richard Hale. The atmosphere was thick with anticipation, though no one seemed to know exactly why we'd been gathered. Mr. Carmichael entered quietly, his presence commanding silence. He nodded at me once, almost imperceptibly, before taking his seat at the head of the table. Then he gestured toward me. "This employee," he said clearly, his lips easy enough to follow, "has been reviewing certain records on my behalf. Today, she will share what she has found." The blood drained from my face. My throat tightened. I hadn't expected it to be public. Not like this, not with Hale's eyes burning into me from across the table. For a moment, my mind screamed at me to stay silent, to retreat into the safety of obscurity. But then my fingers brushed the scar. Hale's face darkened, his mask slipping for the first time. He opened his mouth to retort, but Mr. Carmichael silenced him with a raised hand. "This company," he said, "was built on integrity, and anyone who undermines that foundation will answer for it." I sat down, trembling, my scarf clenched tightly in my hands. The confrontation was far from over, but the balance had shifted. For the first time, Hale looked uncertain. Sometimes the greatest battle isn't won by volume or power, but by the quiet strength to stand when every instinct tells you to sit. The investigation that followed was swift and merciless. Once Mr. Carmichael gave the word, an independent audit team was brought in. The files I had uncovered became the keystone, the missing puzzle pieces that exposed a structure of deception Hale could no longer deny. Within weeks, his empire of charm crumbled. Deals unraveled, partners distanced themselves, and evidence mounted like a tide no amount of laughter or deflection could hold back. The day he was escorted out of the building, Hale didn't look at anyone but me. His eyes, once mocking, burned with a mixture of anger and disbelief, as if he couldn't accept that a junior employee with nothing more than honesty and a scarf could undo him. For a brief moment, I felt almost sorry for him. Almost. But then I remembered the people he had trampled, the teams he had set up to fail, the truth he had buried for his own gain. His fall wasn't my doing. It was his own. What surprised me most was not Hale's downfall, but what came after. Mr. Carmichael called me into his office one last time. He gestured for me to sit, then placed the silver key back on the table. "You kept your promise," he said, his lips shaping each word with deliberate care. "You spoke truth. You protected what mattered. And you carried humility, even when others mocked you." I reached for the key, but he shook his head. "It's yours now." A reminder. The door it opens may change, but the choice will always remain the same. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The sunlight streamed through the tall windows, bathing his desk in a quiet glow. Finally, I pulled the scarf from my bag and placed it gently on the desk. "This," I said, my voice soft but steady, "reminds me why I did it. Not for power, not even for justice. For respect, for listening, when others wouldn't." He picked up the scarf, running his fingers over the swirled pattern, and for the first time, I saw his eyes glisten. He set it down carefully, almost reverently, before signing a final word to me: legacy. In that moment, I understood. It wasn't about climbing ladders or winning applause. It was about leaving behind something that endured: trust, courage, integrity. A legacy not measured in wealth or status, but in the quiet power of choosing what is right. Sometimes the smallest gesture, a greeting in sign language, a scarf laid on a table, can echo louder than a lifetime of empty words. In the months that followed, life didn't become suddenly glamorous. I didn't get a corner office or a fat promotion overnight. I still took the train every morning, still carried my coffee in a chipped thermos, still wrestled with spreadsheets and deadlines. But something inside me had changed. The scarf now rested in a frame on my bedroom wall, a quiet reminder of the day I chose courage over comfort. And the silver key, I carried it on a chain around my neck, close to my heart. Not as a trophy, but as a promise to myself. Mr. Carmichael never treated me like a protege. He treated me as an equal. Sometimes he'd call me into his office just to ask what I thought about something the others overlooked. Not because I had all the answers, but because he trusted I'd give him the truth, unpolished and unvarnished. That trust was worth more than any title I could hold. And my coworkers? Some still whispered. Some still looked at me with envy or skepticism. But others slowly began to see me differently, not because I was extraordinary, but because I had stood when it mattered. And sometimes, that's enough to make people rethink their own silence. I think back often to that first moment, standing in the boardroom, raising my hand to greet a man in his own language while others laughed. They thought it was foolish. But maybe foolishness, when it springs from kindness, is the most powerful thing of all. If you've listened this far, I hope you carry this with you. Integrity doesn't announce itself with trumpets. Courage doesn't always roar. Sometimes it's as simple as a gesture, a choice to listen when everyone else looks away, a willingness to step forward when silence would be safer. And those choices, the small, quiet ones, can change not only how others see you, but how you see yourself. So if you ever find yourself in that moment of hesitation, with fear on one side and kindness on the other, choose kindness. Choose courage. Because you never know who might be watching or how far that choice might carry. After all, legacies aren't built in grand speeches. They're built in the quiet, everyday ways we dare to be true.